The Chicago Bulls have gotten off to a rocky start to their season. 13 games in and they're sitting 6-7, 7th in the Eastern Conference, but also only a half game ahead of the 11th spot in the East. And you see a lot of Bulls fans up in arms and panicking about the future of this team, from Zach Lavine not being worth the max contract that he was given in the offseason, as he hasn't been available to play in some games due to injury management, and also when he does play, he hasn't really been playing that particularly well, to Nikola Vucevic yet again not looking like the player we traded 2 first-round picks for, and of course to Lonzo Ball and whether he's even going to be available to play this season. All of this has had Bulls fans questioning the future of this team and whether in fact the Bulls will actually even be able to make the playoffs. Leave it to us Bulls fans to start panicking early in this season. That includes me, guys. I'm not saying I'm immune to this, but because I feel we have been so negative and critical of this Bulls team so far this year, in today's video we're going to be discussing why the Bulls are actually better than their record would otherwise indicate, and some encouraging signs from the Bulls that should prove to demonstrate why they will be a competitive team in the Eastern Conference. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, as most of you probably know, I have a live chat during the games on the channel for every Bulls game. And it's just a basic chat where we can talk through things that are happening in the game. And for the most part, it's just a lot of ranting about things that aren't going well in the game. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of things to be concerned about with what we have seen from this team. The Bulls' inability to close out games, close games, especially compared to last season when the Bulls were one of the best fourth quarter teams in the league. The Bulls' shooting, especially from outside, has been very poor. Zach Lavine missing games due to injury management, and when he has played, like I said, still clearly not looking 100%. That's not encouraging. But all of these aspects aside, and the Bulls' record currently being 1 game below 500, there are aspects about this team that I feel are getting overlooked. Things that have looked better than what we saw from last season. First of all, when you look at the Bulls games that they have played so far this year, there is a world in which a lot of these losses could have been wins. You look at the second game of the season in which the Bulls played the Wizards, they're down 2, Bulls have a chance for the last shot, DeMar takes the 3 for the final shot for the win. Wizards defender, I can't remember who it was, doesn't allow DeMar a safe landing spot when coming down from the shot, which is now a foul in the NBA, has been for a while, ever since Zaza Pachulia ended Kawhi Leonard's season back when he was with the Spurs. It doesn't get called, but then the following day in the last 2-minute report, it's revealed that DeMar was in fact fouled on that play and should have been awarded 3 free throws. Of course, we don't know if DeMar would have hit all 3 of those shots to actually take the win, but even if he just makes 2, they would send it to overtime, and who knows how the game would have turned out from there. And then you look across all of the Bulls' other losses, aside from the home opener against the Cavs in which they got absolutely obliterated, which is still bad, but we also now know that this Cavs team is really, really good and have been dominating a lot of teams in the early going of the season. Aside from that loss, every loss the Bulls have suffered has been within single digits, and some of these were also a matter of poor officiating and missed calls down the stretch, as confirmed later by the last 2-minute reports. Most recently, the loss against the Pelicans, Brandon Ingram's push off on Alex Caruso that gave them the go-ahead bucket that should have been taken back and the Bulls would have gotten the ball. The Spurs game in the final possessions with some questionable calls, and then the Sixers game in which DeMar DeRozan got hacked at the end of the game, which was a no call, and then Embiid on the other end sinks a 3 for the dagger. All in the final minute of the game. And look, I don't want to just be blaming officiating, because at the end of the day, you shouldn't find yourself in a position where you have to leave the game in the hands of the officials to make the right call in a closeout game, because they're not always going to make the right call. In fact, in late game situations, more often than not, refs aren't going to call fouls unless they're blatantly obvious. Not only that, but the Bulls have made some careless plays in closeout moments that we really didn't see last season. DeMar bouncing the ball off his foot on an inbound play in the final seconds of the game against the Pelicans is case in point. The Bulls have also been missing shots down the stretch, which we didn't see happen a lot last season, especially for DeMar DeRozan, who was one of the most clutch players in the league last year and was being called the king of the fourth quarter with how lethal he was in closeout games in the final minutes. And the reason I say all of this is because I know it sounds like, well, you're actually just proving exactly why we should be concerned about this season for the Bulls, because they have been so bad in the fourth quarter and can't finish out games. It's actually precisely why I think we should be encouraged, because based on what we saw last year, the Bulls being 3rd in the league in offensive rating and net rating in clutch games last season, clutch games being defined as games that are within 5 points with less than 5 minutes to play, and they were 27-15 in clutch time last season, whereas this season so far, 0-6, because again, aside from that loss to the Cavs, all of their other losses have been in close game situations, and they're also right now 30th, dead last in net rating in clutch moments. You can't possibly think that that kind of trend is going to continue when you see such a massive drop-off from their ability to close out games last season. The drop-off is so massive and the sample size is so small, given we're only 13 games into the season, that you would have to expect the Bulls to start averaging out clutch moments and getting back to at least being league average in clutch time. Not saying it'll look like last season where they were one of the best clutch teams in the NBA because they were probably outperforming what was expected of them in late game moments, but with how poor they have been performing in those clutch moments in a small sample size, they should and will start progressing more as games start to move on, because they have too many talented players for this kind of trend to continue. And again, you flip the script on those 4 games that I mentioned in which they were questionable calls down the stretch, some in which were actually confirmed to be incorrect calls in the last 2-minute report. You switch those games around to wins. The Bulls are actually looking at a record of 10-3 instead of 6-7, which would put the Bulls second in the East, only behind Milwaukee. And instead, we're talking about how the Bulls are shocking the NBA world yet again by getting off to a hot start and being at the top of the East, and doing so without Lonzo Ball, who was key in the Bulls' early success last season, and without Zach Lavine occasionally. The other thing to consider here, and why the Bulls are actually better than their record would indicate, the Bulls so far have the second hardest strength of schedule in the NBA. And not only have the Bulls had tough opponents to face in the early going, they have had 4 back-to-backs in their first 12 games of the season. That is unheard of for a team to be playing in that many back-to-backs that close together. If you caught the most recent episode of the Bulls Talk podcast, you heard Casey Johnson say that he's never seen that before, and he's been covering the game for a long time, dating all the way back to the 90s. That's insane for a team to have that many back-to-backs in a matter of 3 weeks. So if you factor in going against tougher opponents to start the year, whereas last season the Bulls actually started out the year with a much easier schedule. They were actually in the bottom 5 in terms of strength of schedule in their first 20 games of the season. You factor in that guys are playing in multiple back-to-backs, back-to-back games in which they're traveling, by the way, for all of them. It's not like they're playing back-to-back games, both of the games being at home. You also factor in that a lot of these games have been close and have gone down to the wire in the final possession, and then you also consider the poor officiating that led to games being a loss that could have ended up a win. But even aside from all of those variables, if you actually look at the Bulls' numbers as a team and how they have shown up in their first few games, they're actually 6th in the league in defense based on defensive rating, which is even better than their defense was last season to start the year. They're 18th in offensive rating, which, yes, that's well below where they were in offensive rating last year to start the season. But remember, they're without Lonzo Ball right now, who's one of the Bulls' best shooters. He actually was the Bulls' best outside shooter and was a big reason for their strong offense in transition. They're 12th in the league in net rating, which was better than last season, where they were 20th, 13th in the league in pace, which was also better than last season. And look, the other reason why I think all this is encouraging is because the Bulls are doing all of this without Lonzo Ball, who the Bulls were by far worse in all of these metrics, including their overall record after he went down and missed the rest of the season. I'm not saying the Bulls are a better team than where they were last season at the beginning of the year when they had Lonzo, but they are most certainly a better team than what we saw last season in the second half of the year when they did not have Lonzo. And they're doing so with a harder schedule, a lot of back-to-backs, games that could have easily gone their way if it weren't for a couple of missteps and a couple of bad calls, and they're doing so being one of the worst teams in clutch moments, which you know isn't going to continue. Eventually the Bulls are going to get it together and start winning some of those games in clutch moments. The law of averages would say it's just inevitable. So as much as I know some Bulls fans are frustrated by what they have seen so far this season, and that frustration is valid and justified because there are still a lot of areas the Bulls need to work on as a team, particularly their shooting, and Billy Donovan needs to be better with his rotations, but we'll save that topic for a different day. But keep in mind, the Bulls are actually competing well against the better teams in the league, actually winning a good portion of those games. This coming when the Bulls went, what, 1-17 last year, whatever it was, against teams that finished in the top 3 of their respective conferences. And this coming from a grueling schedule with a lot of games compacted together. And then they're also missing one of their better players in Lonzo Ball, and also their star player in a handful of games in Zach Lavine. Now, if this trend continues and the Bulls continue losing these close games, or the energy level starts to decline and they're not even being competitive in said games, then that's when we really need to start worrying. But overall, there are a lot of encouraging signs from what we have seen from the Bulls in this sample size, small sample size to start the season. Let me know what you guys think as far as the Bulls start to this season in the comments, and as always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.